All right, so we are recording, so keep that in mind. And again, if you camera's off and mute yourselves when you're not talking, that would be great. So we're going to talk about the Public Library Annual Report, which is a report that public libraries throughout the country fill out every year. And it sort of covers, the intention is for it to cover almost every aspect of what you do during the year, at least everything that's quantifiable. So I'm going to turn on a PowerPoint. Let's get that going and walk through that. And then I'm going to switch over and do a demo of the survey portal site that you'll be using, because it might be a little bit more intuitive that way. Okay, so now I am sharing this, and okay, and we're, all right. Okay, so Public Library Annual Report. What is the annual report? The report is a statistical overview of a year in the life of public library. Like I said, it tries to capture most everything that the library does financially and in terms of things that it achieves, at least the quantifiable ones. Most questions on the report, and the report is, I will say, somewhat lengthy. If you haven't done it before, it is somewhat lengthy. Most of the questions are determined by the Institute of Museum and Library Services with input from each of the 50 plus territories, state data coordinators, of which I am one. So every year there may be a little bit of shift, but in general, the questions have been produced by IMLS. In addition, there are questions that we've added, Vermont has added on our own to the report. So there are some of each throughout it, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on. Oh, also, sorry, I should have said this beforehand. If you have questions at any point, I'm going to try to pause after each little chunk, but if you have questions, feel free to just unmute yourself and ask a question, or to put something in the chat. Hold on, I just need to let some more folks in. Hold on for one sec, if you would. All right, thanks for everybody who just popped in. We only just got started, so we are I was talking about sort of the basics of the annual report. If you wouldn't mind keeping your cameras off and muting yourself when you're not talking, that would be great. If you're on the phone, and the trick to muting yourself is *6, we'll mute and then unmute you. And all right, thank you. Let's see. All right, so we're going to hop back into the PowerPoint. Okay, so I was saying the annual report is put together by IMLS in concert with all the state data coordinators from each state and territory. Who uses the info in the report? Nationally, IMLS uses it. They actually do. Ultimately, it's kind of their report. So they get the data, they do a ton of work with the data, and then they spit it out. And I'll show you where you can find their data afterwards. Sorry, just kind of let some more folks in. Okay. So IMLS uses it. Federal government uses it to see what libraries are doing, basically, to see the changes year to year, to kind of see the importance of libraries. And I think that's a big thing that the report does. And then additionally, sorry, just letting a few more folks in. We have a good crowd today. Thank you, everybody who joined. Let's see. All right, so hopping back. Who uses the info? Also, other state and public libraries nationwide. So a big part of the report is to use it to compare yourself with other folks, other libraries, in our case, other state libraries, and see what's being accomplished and how you differ. As a reminder, if everybody could mute themselves when they're not talking and could make sure their camera is off, that would be gratefully appreciated. Other people who use the info that comes out of the report the Department of Libraries. We use it significantly because it's a good snapshot of what everybody's doing. And then state government uses it to figure out what libraries are accomplishing throughout the state. And then locally, your library uses the information. That you can use the information that you're coming up with on your own, but it's also, you have the opportunity to compare yourself with peers throughout the state. So you can find libraries that are similar to you and see how you match up, see if there are things that are the same or different. And then finally, members of the that come out of the report to see, again, see what libraries are doing and to compare their library with other libraries to see what everybody's accomplishing. So that's okay. So that's who uses the info in the report. Any questions about that? We'll talk. I'll show you how to get the data if you're interested. But for now, that's who uses the data and roughly what it's for. Any questions? All right, so we'll have to the next. And as a reminder, this is being recorded and we're going to make it available afterwards. So if you have to cut out early or anything like that, it'll be there. All right. When is the report due? Okay, so the report is due every year. It's happens annually. The expected opening date for 2020 is December 1st. It is conceivable that will get shifted because pretty much because of COVID, everything has been, there have been a lot of changes in all of the various state reports. So it's possible to move back. But currently, our tentative plan is December 1. It will run for 2 months. Submission period runs for 2 months until January 29th. And then there will be a 2-week optional extension by request. So if you need 2 more weeks, you let me know. Boom, you have an extension. At that point, you need to have had your data in. So. But that's, let's see, jumping ahead. Okay, so that was when is the report due? And any questions on when the report is due? Again, it's possible that may get nudged, but I'm hopeful that we're looking at December 1 through January 29th. All right. So what time period does the report cover? This is one of the most confusing aspects of the report. So don't feel bad if you're confused. It is confusing. And if you ever feel like you don't have a handle on it, you should talk to me and we will talk it over because it's a little bit weird. Individual libraries in Vermont use a bunch of different fiscal years. The most popular are the calendar year, which is January 1st to December 31st. The sort of traditional, sometimes also known as the state fiscal year, this is the one that the state of Vermont uses. It is July 1st through June 30th of the next year. So, for example, July 1st of 2019 through June 30th of 2020. Then there's the federal fiscal year, which is similar but shifted, is October 1st of the year to September 30th of the next year. And then there are others. Libraries use a bunch of different ones. Your fiscal year is probably just sort of an accident of maybe your municipality or the way that your library was put together or just what you've been doing for a really long time. So you should be reporting based on your fiscal year. We don't want you to change your fiscal year for us. We just want you to report what your fiscal year is. However, so if you use the calendar year, we want you to give us the calendar year. If you use the July 1st to June 30th, that's what we want. But there's a trick, which is we want your last fiscal year that ended by October 15th. That's just the way it's structured. So, which basically means if you're doing the traditional July to June year, or the federal October to September year, you just give us your most recent one. It's really straightforward. So if you do the traditional one, it's the one that ended in at the end of June. If you do the federal one, it's the one that ended at the end of September. And however, if you do the calendar year, this is the one that's the major one that's confusing. You should be giving us last year's. Normally, this is normally the case. So if you follow the calendar year, you would be submitting 2019 data. January through December 2019. I know that's weird, but that's the way that they've been doing this report for the last 15 years. So that's what you should be doing. However, there are a few people who are off schedule who are calendar year libraries. So the caveat to that is that you might want to check with me, because it's possible that you're off schedule, and in that case we want you to keep giving you can't double send the same year twice, or everything gets very confused. So it's possible that you might have given us 2019 last year, if there was a point of confusion, and this happens sometimes. I will tell everyone who is off schedule, but in short, if you have a normal schedule, if you're following the July to June or October to September, we want the most recent one. If you're following a calendar year, you're probably sending us 2019 data. That is probably the most confusing part about the annual report, is the dates. So, does anybody have any questions? If you have sort of specific questions about your situation, you can ask me right now, but we can just follow up after this is over and make sure you absolutely know what period we want. But any questions anybody wants to ask on that right now? Okay, we're going to keep moving. You can always come back to if you think of a question later. All right, changes for this coming year. Less relevant for folks who are new, but I'm just going to march through it anyway. So we've had a few changes this year. There's been a number of changes around COVID. And depending on your reporting period, you may or may not be reporting the COVID period, but the questions are still going to be there. We'll talk about what you do if they don't apply to you. There's been a couple of other changes. A couple numbers now you will say whether something is an estimate or an actual count. We removed a few technology questions that I think were not getting used very much and were just taking up space. And then we've tried to simplify the language a little bit. But again, we'll march through that, and that'll make a little more sense in a second. Okay, so basics of the report. I am going to send out an email to every single library shortly before the report opens. It has the address you should be going to and your login information. Every library has set login information. It doesn't change. It's the same as last year and the year before and the year before that. So if someone has it lying around, you have it, but I'm also going to email everyone. So that's the first thing. You can work on the report in any order. It's broken into sections, which we're about to see, but you don't need to do it in that order. You can jump around all you want. Just make sure that you click Save when you're done with a page, or you can click, or if you move forward or backward, it automatically saves. In the upper right-hand corner, show you this in a second, there's a button that says Show Last Year's Answers. I think you should have that going all the time. You should. It is always helpful to see what you put in last year, and you can see whether what you're putting in this year is wildly different, and maybe there was an error one year or the other. It also just tells you kind of what kind of answer you expect. You know, if there's a question, how many, what's our physical circulation? It's sort of ballpark. If you have 400,000 and last year was 30,000, probably there's an error on one of the sides. So I think that you should always have last year's answers going. This is a big one, which I'll probably harp on a couple more times. If you have any questions at any point about the survey, please get in touch with me. Don't hesitate at all to get in touch with me. You should just, don't wrestle with it for a while and say, oh, I spent 2 days on this and now I'm going to call you. Just email me immediately if you have questions, and we'll try to work it out. I don't want you, this takes enough time already. You don't need to spend time hitting your head against a wall, which may happen anyway, but we want to minimize that. So if you have questions at any point about the survey, get in touch with me. Last one, and this is a change from last year. There used to be a little button next to every question that was instructions. You would click on that and a little more instructions would appear. Instead of offering the instructions, we just tried to make the questions more intuitive. So we removed that option. There's still a whole thing of all the instructions, but in general, if a question isn't intuitive, probably just get in touch with me. And you don't necessarily need to dig through the instructions. If it's not intuitive, probably there's something, you're in a weird case or something isn't making sense. So get in touch. Okay, I just went through a fair amount of stuff. Does anybody have questions based on that?
Mhm.
All right, so we're going to hop back to that. Okay, so that's basics of the report. Report overview. I'm just going to show this, and then we're going to show a demo of what the portal actually looks like. These are sections of the report. They're not all the same size. Some of them are short, and some of them are fairly lengthy. First off, directory info, basically contact info for the library, and you and the head of the trustees. Staffing, which is weekly hours for various kinds of staff members. Space, which is literally just how square footage of your library. Operating income, which is almost all the money that is coming into the library in the budget, really in any fashion it gets broken into, but we'll show that in greater detail. Capital revenue, which is revenue for large projects, frequently construction or renovation, but conceivably for anything any large one-time expense. It could be buying a catalog ILS system, something else like that, but is most well known for construction projects. Operating expenditures, which is the great majority of all the money going out of the building. Almost all of the expenses that you will be spending in a year go in here. Holdings, which is basically everything that you own in your collection. It covers all the physical things broken down by different types, but then there's also your electronic collections and things like databases. And then lastly, services, which is a little bit of a catch-all and covers all the stuff you do that is quantifiable and that we ask questions about. So there's a lot of different things in services. But all right, so we're just gonna hop right into it. And like I said, I'm going to do a demo because I think it will be a little bit more instructive. So let me unshare that page. And then we're going to share the portal. Okay, great. Let me see if we can make this a little bit bigger for y'all. Okay, so this is the portal where you will go and fill out the survey. Like I said, everybody has their own login and password, but it does not change from year to year. So if you have it lying around from previous years, it's still going to work. But I'll also be sending it out to everyone. So this is my login, and yours will look just a little different because I can see every library, and you will only see your own information. So I'm going to hop into, let's see, we don't have a test, so I'm just going to hop into this Alden Vault. Okay, so this is, let's see, it looks like, yeah, so this is what the survey looks like. I'll just show you around the page briefly. So on the left side is site navigation. It's all of the sections are broken down, and then each section, the pages, the number of pages in each section. So you can hop around from section to section if you want, or you can just do the whole thing in order, beginning to end. Whatever works best. Again, once you can stop it, you can come back to it a week later. All your data is still in there. You can do it at whatever sort of pace works best for you, whatever structure works best for you. Okay, so that's on the left side. You can navigate through the site this way. You can also, once you fill out a page, at the bottom of the page, it says next. So you can just hit next. That will move you to the next page. There's also a previous button once you get further into the report. So let me just go here so you can see what a previous button looks like. Previous and next, top of the page, also at the bottom of the page. So important note, use those to navigate. Do not use the back and forward button in your browser because it will mostly work fine, but every once in a while it doesn't, and it will cause issues, and you might lose data. You might fill out a page, and then you use the back arrow, and all that data may never get saved. The system is set to save your page whenever you go to a new page or click save. So you want to get in the habit of moving around that way and not moving around using the browser arrow buttons, which is, I know, a little hard. It's a little bit unintuitive because that's how we do it all in every other browser-based thing. But So that's important piece number one is use that to move around. Okay, I'm just going to describe the stuff at the upper right-hand corner because this is on basically every page. So save. Save is a way to save a page if you are not moving to another page. So it never hurts to hit it, but it's basically you hit save and then like you're going to go, oh, here's one case. If you leave it for enough time, it will log you out. I think enough time is maybe half an hour. So if you think you're going to step away, it never hurts to hit save. If you're going to close out your computer or something, you definitely want to hit save before that. So that's save. Previous and next just move you back and forth. Submit is when you were ultimately done with the report. And I'll show you what that looks like, but we're not there yet. Printing. So printing is when you want to print your whole report. Typically, that's probably at the end. There is an issue with printing. They're still working on it, but they were working on it last year and didn't have it fixed. It is when you print, you should be able to do it as a web report or as a PDF, but the PDF one is not working. So what you have to do, the easiest way to do it is if you want a PDF of your report, and you may well, ask me for it. If you want to do it yourself, basically you have to do the thing where you print something as a PDF, which is fairly straightforward, but is an extra step, and that should work. And by that, and what you would do is you go print, you say, show me the web report, and then from here you would print it as a PDF. Again, the easier option is to say, hey Josh, give me a PDF of our report, and I'm always happy to do that. And also maybe sometime they'll fix it, but that has been there for a year or so. Show status, we'll talk about that later. That's when you are close to done. It shows you questions that you still need to fill out or that you need to do something called an edit check for. So that's where we're at. Any questions? I've sort of talked around the basics of the survey page. Any questions about the basics of the survey page? Oh, yes. What is the preferred browser? Thank you. We were going to say that later. If you have access to Google Chrome is the best option. It is the one that is the most consistent and least likely to cause challenges. So if you have access to it, or if you can even install it, that's a good option. Failing that, Firefox mostly behaves itself. Occasionally there's rendering issues. I don't think that the Firefox issues are super dramatic, but I would still recommend Chrome if it's an option. Microsoft Edge, I would avoid. And it's true that new versions of Edge are basically Chrome, so those are probably fine, but old versions of Edge are problematic and can cause data loss and other things like that. So I would avoid Edge. But if you have questions about you don't have access to Chrome, then let me know. My understanding is that Safari, if you're on Mac, is somewhere in between. It's probably a little bit less consistent than Firefox, but I don't have like a definitely avoid it notice from the vendor. So Chrome's the best option if you can. But yeah, let me know if you have questions about that going forward. Okay, so first section is contact information, and much of this is already going to be listed for you because the expectation is your address isn't changing every year, your phone number isn't changing every year. So a lot of this is already in here. Then there are a few things that you will need to add on your own. Additionally, we want to know who the current librarian, the director is, and the current chairperson of the Board of Trustees. They are there mostly in case we have questions, we know who to ask. I'm just going to ask you, the directors anyway, or whoever was filling it out, but that's that. Additionally, and this is going to be, this is a thing I need to mention. So I'm showing you this demo. This is from last year's survey. This year's survey hasn't been finalized yet. So there are a few different little tweaks. Some of the COVID stuff isn't in here. So I'm going to describe it, but you're not going to be seeing it. So that comes up in this part, days and times of library operation. So it's going to ask, basically how many weeks you were open, and then how many hours you were open in those weeks, how many weeks you had reduced hours if you seasonally are closed or not as open as much, like if you have if you do half time in the winter or the summer. That's the other question here. So that's the stuff that's in there from every year. There's going to be new COVID questions about hours, and it's basically going to ask, let me make sure I'm describing these correctly. It's going to ask if you were closed to the public and how many weeks that was the case. Closed to the public means they can't come in your building, or like in a traditional way. If they come into your vestibule, that doesn't count as coming into your building. If they come into curbside, that does not count as coming into your building. And this is going to come up later because this is IMLS clarified what they mean by a visitor, and a visitor is physically in your building. So for our information, we're going to count how many weeks the public couldn't come into your building. And then we are going to count, let's see, hold on, let me pull it up actually, because I am, I'm afraid I'm going to misspeak, so I apologize. And I'm sorry, I flubbed this. Survey final. But I want to make sure. Okay, so the questions are going to be how many hours through your whole reporting period. And again, these are COVID-related questions. They are going to be less relevant if you're not, if COVID doesn't cover your reporting period. So it's how many hours in that whole year were you open normally or open by appointment? Let's see, sorry, open normally, open by appointment, and then open only for curbside. So we're basically going to try to get a total of those, and those are a little weird. We'll and the trick is if you're doing multiples, like if you're open normally and open for curbside, that counts as open normally. You basically should only be counting for this big total of hours. You should only be counting the most open service that you were offering at a given time. We'll probably go back over that later because that is more than a little confusing. But basically, for this section, you're going to be asked total number of hours in the year you were open to the public normally, total number of hours you were open for to the public by appointment, but not open normally, and total number of hours you're open for curbside pickup, but not open normally or for appointments. So you could potentially have 3 different numbers there. I'm going to answer Gail's question, and then if anybody has questions about what I just said, and that's totally fair, you can ask them. Gail said, when you say current director or current chair member, do you mean who is filling it out, or who was the representative during the reporting period? Okay, so it's for that one, it is as of the day that you were writing it, as you were writing the report, who is in charge of both of those things. There is a separate section for if a staff member who's not the director is doing it, they will put their name somewhere else. But this is the librarian or director. I'm just going to let somebody else in. Okay. All right. So questions about the contact page. Oh, Jill, wouldn't mind turning off your camera. Otherwise, I think it's the recording. And I'm going to mute you, but feel free to unmute yourself whenever you have questions. Okay, so we were just talking about basically the contact page, much of which is easy. Then there's the hours and weeks that you were open. That's the more confusing part. Does anybody have questions on that? Okay, thank you. Yes, year reporting, which is 2019, doesn't reflect COVID. What are you going to do? Okay, so there are a number of COVID questions in different shapes. For many of them, what you're going to say is not applicable. which you say a couple of different ways. And this is true for other reasons that you would say not applicable. If it's a text-based question, put n/a. If it is a number-based question, it's not going to let you put n/a, so you have to put 0 in. And then the third case is, and this doesn't answer really the COVID one, but if there's ever a question that you don't know the answer to, you don't have that number, -1 is the code the system is looking for to say that you don't have that number. So again, for COVID, if your period isn't covered in COVID, what you want to do is say NA or 0 whenever that comes up. There are a few questions we'll talk about later that you could answer if you wanted. They are COVID. It's things like virtual programming. So if you happen to have the numbers, you could put them in there. We put them in there because of COVID, but even though you're not reporting on COVID period, you could submit them if you had them. But if you don't have them, that's fine too. Yes. So in general, if COVID is not in your reporting period, you should NA or 0. You can submit a couple of these anyway if you want. Any other questions about contact page? There's actually one more contact page left, but okay. I'm going to jump to the next page, and that didn't work because there's a little bug. Okay, so end of the contact page, contact section, directory section is beginning date and end date for your reporting period. So the fiscal year we were talking about earlier, this is the beginning and end of your fiscal year. It will give you an error if it thinks your reporting period doesn't match up with last year's reporting period. And if for some reason you see that error, come talk to me immediately. We will hopefully catch those beforehand, but it's possible that there is a discrepancy between what you reported last year and what year you think you're reporting this year or something like that. But basically, this is the beginning and end of your year. For example, if it's a calendar year, you would be 01/01/2019 to 12/31/2019. So that's that. Population is already put in there. I figured that out and put that in, so you don't need to touch that. And that's the end of the directory section. So I'm going to answer a question, and then if anybody has more questions about directory area. Does -1 go for any unknown answers? Yes. So in general, basically NA or 0 means that question is not relevant. You don't do it. It's not a thing that you're involved in. -1 means you do it, but you don't have a number for it. It didn't get recorded. There's some other issue. So basically, -1 is always the answer if for some reason data is just not available. And I know it's weird. It looks -1 looks a little bit weird, but that's what the system wants for it. So thank you, Gail. Other questions about the directory page section of the report? Okay. We're going to hop forward to staffing. Staffing is basically weekly hours for staff. And what we want is basically normal hours for staff, the sort of average hours that would be happening during the year. If you have big changes during the year, besides COVID, you get in touch with me and we can make sure that you're doing it. But this is sort of supposed to cover if you're fully staffed, if things are like going normal. This is your normal situation. These are weekly hours. So it's broken into a couple of categories. Librarians are broken into a few categories. Librarians, what is a librarian? A librarian is someone who does, in many cases, it's someone who has the title of librarian, but it is someone who does professional level library tasks. The definition is a little nebulous. To some degree, it's if your library treats them as though they are a librarian, then that's then you want to lump them under librarians. In many cases, other staff can cover a lot of ground. It can cover catalogers, it can cover front desk, it can cover technical people, it can cover a lot of things, but anyone who you're not counting as librarian goes under other staff. But librarians are broken into 3 categories: people who have a master's degree, people who have a certificate of public librarianship through Vermont, and people who don't have either of those. So ideally, you can break your weekly hours into those chunks for librarians. And then other staff is everyone else. Anyone who's not a librarian who is paid out of the budget. It includes maintenance people if they are treated like staff members and paid out of the budget. It includes anybody who is a week-to-week staff member. So that should cover most of the great majority of your staff. There are a couple other additional questions. So the first one is, if there are staff who are paid, but they're not paid from your budget, that is typically they are grant funded, they are through AmeriCorps, they are from some other thing where the money comes from somewhere else, and it never comes through the library's budget. Most people don't have that, but occasionally you do. And then lastly, number of volunteer hours in an average week. This should cover everybody who's a volunteer. And again, this is a normal week. This is not a COVID week. Volunteer librarians, frontline staff, shelvers, board members, really anybody, people who clean, repair books, anybody who's serving as volunteer. Okay, so that's staff page. Any questions about staffing? Okay, all right, so we're gonna hop ahead to space. This is the easiest one. This is the square footage of your library. It's already filled in, but if you look at it and you say, that seems really weird, it's possible that we've had it wrong for a very long time. It's basically, we just keep the same thing year to year unless somebody lets me know they have an addition. But that's it for space, easiest section. Okay, operating income. So operating income is broken into a couple of categories. It starts with, in most cases, the largest category, which is tax support, local tax support. So what you do for that is you figure out local tax support from your town. So you put the town name and then you put the amount that you have received from them. If you get support from more than one municipality, there are a few cases in here where you have this option. You add town, boom, you get another town, you write them in. So if you have the town that you were in, you enter them, and then you have the town next door, they also give tax support, you include them. So you want to make sure that all of the municipalities that give you support, in some cases there is a city and a town that give support, or a village and a town that give support. You want to capture everybody, every municipality who's giving you money should go in here. If you're unclear about the amount, you might talk to the treasurer on your board, or if you're a municipality, you might talk to the finance folks at the municipality. Somebody has this number, so and somebody has all the rest of these numbers, hopefully. So that's the start. Okay, so then it adds it up, and you get total local tax support. Next, we have a small section on non-resident borrower fees. If your library charges non-residents money, that goes in here. So it's basically a question of how much do you charge, and then how much did you make in the year. If you don't, if you didn't charge anything, or you don't charge fees, put in zeros. Next, this is a big one, all other local income. So it's basically, it describes it as private support, gifts, fines, fees, fundraising, book sales, friends contributions, any donations, almost all donations come in here. So these all just get lumped together. Boom. Okay, next, transfers. Transfers are one of the more confusing aspects of income. Transfers are money that that was acquired in a previous year in some fashion. Money that's the most likely is it's coming out of a bank account or an investment or something like that. It's basically money that otherwise looks like it is just magically appearing, but actually came from somewhere. It came from a previous year. So that's that. this can get somewhat confusing about what goes where. So really, if you have things that you're not sure about, give me a holler and we can dig into them. But it sort of describes roughly what it looks like. It's generally, yes, generally money that that is coming into your income that you set aside in some fashion in a previous year. If you put money in a bank and then you use it 2 months later and it's still the same year, it's not a transfer. It's just a normal one. It just sat in the bank for a little while. It is basically, like I said, the crux of it is trying to explain how your budget sort of matches up, budget and expenses match up. And if you get a whole bunch of money from a transfer, it might not be visible otherwise. It would look like you took in 40,000 and you spent 80,000. And that's really why transfers are there, to just explain where that money came from. Okay, next, grants. There are a bunch of little broken down questions about grants. Mostly, there are the few that a lot of people get, things like summer reading program, let's see, the courier program, a few other popular programs, and then there is a section for other. So ideally, if you're getting grants, we want them counted here. And the big question sort of, if they're one of the ones that's named, put them in there. But otherwise, the question is whether it's federal or not federal money, because that's IMLS wants to have federal money broken out. So this, you put it in here, but if you have questions about grants, you say, oh, I got this. I don't know if we got this. Let me know, and we'll figure it out. But yeah, so that's usually the smaller amount than say your tax support, but that's where it goes. And then the last section is all other grants, including private grants, and they all get put in there. If you need to add more spaces, you hit this button that says add a group. If you decide you made too many spaces, you can always remove a group. And then last but not least is in-kind support. This one can be a little challenging and is something we're trying to get better at bookkeeping. But in-kind support is basically whenever anybody, any person or organization is doing something for the library and they're not being paid, but it's a service that you normally would pay someone for. Things like snow plowing, IT repair, working on your website, fixing a computer, building something that you would typically pay for. We would like to put in kind. If the municipality takes care of things for the library that are not included in your budget, those should also go there as well. That's something that we haven't been, that not everybody has been up on, but we're trying to do that. And then the estimate is the best you can do. How much do you think plowing for a season would cost? How much do you think having somebody come in and fix computers would cost? The line of whether something should be counted as in-kind support or is just volunteering is, would you normally pay someone to do it? If you normally would pay someone to do it, it should be counted under in-kind support. Okay, that is the end of income. Does that make sense? Do people have questions? Ooh, volunteer programming. That's a good question. Okay, so probably is the situation. Sometimes it gets a little fuzzy. Sometimes my my breakdown is somebody offers you something, you take them up on it, and it happens at your library. If they had charged you, if they had said X amount of money, or I won't do this, would you have done it, or would you have said no, I don't want to do that program? So if someone offers something and you're like, well, I'll take it because it's free, but I wouldn't pay for it. To my mind, it's kind of less in kind. I know that's a little bit nebulous, but I think that if someone does program for you, I think you certainly can include it in there, unless you're just, I don't want to say doing it out of politeness because that's not how we operate, but you certainly can, and you would just use whatever the roughly standard amount that you would do for a presenter. I think it would yeah, and sure, I would typically include that. Any other questions about income? Okay, we're going to hop ahead to capital revenue. Many years, your capital revenue is zero, is the reality. It is any large, it's a sort of large one-time expense. Most typically construction, either new building or an addition or remodeling or something like that. But it can be any other large one-time expenses. So it could be we got a server. It could be we're on a new ILS and there were a lot of upfront costs. It can be landscaping. It can be anything that is a significant for you one-time expense. So this gets broken out here, and it gets broken out where it comes from. Local revenue, state revenue, federal revenue, other revenue. Again, most years you might not have any, but if you are facing that, get in touch with me and we can figure out where to put that in and how that works. Let's see. Capital revenue. Okay, so one that we've come up with before. Capital revenue put aside for another year is, shoot, hold on one second. We had an answer for that. I think that we just don't document it, basically, because it's going into a bank account to sit there for a construction project you're doing the next year. So I think in those cases, the money isn't included, and the next year it would show up in your capital revenue. So if you're putting something aside for a project 2 or 3 years down the line, I think that is our standard answer. Okay, we're going to hop to expenditures now. Expenditures covers the majority of the main expenditures that the library is going to do. In general, this is constructed as though your income and expenditures kind of match up. Ideally, things appear on both ends. That's not always the case, but in general, if there's a big thing that's on one side that is somehow not accounted for at all on the other side, I would probably get in touch with me and just make sure. It's not the end of the world if the two things don't match. We're not going to come and say, looks like you took in more money than you put out. What's wrong? We won't do that, but it just might mean something's getting missed. So, okay, operating expenditures. First off, collections expenditures. How much money did you spend on the collection? So this is the first of a bunch of these that are broken down into multiple categories. So it's how much did you spend on print? How much did you spend on electronic resources? And that is downloadable services, databases, if you have consumer reports, if anything else like that. But it is only electronic collections resources. It is not your ILS. It is not computers that you buy. It's not anything like that. And then the third category is other materials, which is basically audio and video, physical things that are audio and video. So I said that this is the first one of these where you break it down into subtypes. You break it into print, electronic, and other. And if you have that number in those categories, that's great. Put them in there and forget. If, however, you can't break it down by those 3 categories, and that means even if one of them you're not sure about, then what you want to do is just make a total of all of them, all of your collection expenses, and put it in the 4th line. And there are going to be a number of examples here throughout the survey where you have the option to break it down into smaller categories. And if you do, that's great. And if you don't have the information broken down, you just want to put a total in there. And even if you have 2 out of the 3, you're like, okay, I know what my print numbers are. I know what I spent on audio and video. I have literally no idea what I spent on electronics. Then you're just going to want to put a total in because it's otherwise, because you can't have an I don't know in one of the 3 because the system won't ever take it. So, so that's number 1, big expense. Collections. Number 2, big expense. Employees. So in most cases, those are going to be your 2. Well, okay, actually, collections might not be your second biggest, but in many cases, it's a big one. All right, how much did you spend on staff, salaries, and employee benefits? This is another one that is where it's asking for you to break something down, and if you can't, then it'll take a total. So they want salaries, and then they want benefits. Benefits include traditional benefits, insurance and the like, but also includes Social Security and Medicare. So if you have a staff member, even if they don't have what is traditionally thought of as benefits, they are getting you are paying Social Security and Medicare for them. So this number should never be zero if you have anything under salaries. In that case, if you don't have a number here, and sometimes it can be hard to track that number down through the town or whoever, you just want to lump everything under total. If you don't know how much was paid in for Social Security or Medicare. But yeah, so that is for your staffing for the reporting period, total amount spent on salaries and benefits. Does that make sense? So we just talked about collection expenses and staff expenses. Does that make sense? Do people have questions about it? And again, you can always write in the chat or unmute yourself and just ask. And if you're on the phone, to unmute yourself is *6. Okay, I'm going to go to the next page in expenses. This is sort of familiar. The next expense is everything else, pretty much, which I know seems like an unintuitive way to do this, but there's the things that IMLS are interested in, which is how much money are you spending on your collections and your staff, and the things they're less interested, how much are you spending on your building? So this is basically everything else: building maintenance, debt service, heat, insurance, computers, office supplies, service contracts, utilities. Everything else goes in here, basically. So this can be a huge one. Depending on how things are structured, your building may be your biggest expense. Okay, so that goes here. So this is a point where if there are things that the town pays for that are not in your budget, and thus also not in here, they would want to go in kind. So Jill asked a good question on the last page. I always wonder why benefits includes FICA, et cetera. Can't that be included in payroll? Benefits would be health insurance, other things that are optional. That makes total sense. I get that. For some reason, the IMLS question is written in a way where they want to break out benefits. It is unintuitive, and you're right, it doesn't. I think in many cases when we look at benefits, what we're trying to do is, does that library offer their staff benefits, traditional benefits? And the FICA makes it confusing. It's just the way they ask it. Let me write that down though, and just see if I can get a justification for why it is written that way. I think it's a great question, and the answer is I don't know why they wrote it that way. But they do, but they are for now. Okay, so we're on operating expenditures. Okay, so we did other operating expenditures. That should be a big one. Next is funds spent on grant projects. So basically, everything that came into you as a grant probably went out. You spent that money somehow, so it should be listed as a grant project. So if you got courier money, courier should be a grant project here. If you got summer reading program money, summer reading program should be a project here. If you got some other grant to do something else, to buy computers or something, that should be listed here. So in theory, the grant money on both sides should be equivalent unless for some reason the money came in but you didn't spend it in the reporting period, in which case they don't match up. But in general, we want all the grants, if they both happened in the same year, to be in here. So that's grants, and then we're going to talk about this last page, which is first off capital expenditures. So if you got capital revenue and you spent it, boom, this all goes here. So it doesn't care where it came from; it just wants a total. So if you spent, $40,000 on your ILS or $100,000 on your roof. Hopefully you didn't spend $100,000 on your roof, but I guess who knows? Or on your building, it goes in here. And then there's what's called reconciliation, which is basically, this is trying to tell you how your income compared with your expenditures. Usually if it doesn't match, it's probably a little bit instructive. It usually means that something is not, something's missing, and not usually that something weird happened. It can mean that there was money left over from last year and you used it. That's the other thing it often means. We don't, we don't get too hung up on this if it doesn't match. This is kind of an old a legacy, a thing that they focused on more, but I think mostly if it doesn't match, there's a reason for it. So this is maybe an indicator that something didn't get put in, but otherwise I would not lose sleep over it. Dina asks, where do we put funding to attend a conference, Arshel, for example? Yes, so that would definitely go under, I'm going to step back. That would be included under grant income earlier, and then would also be included under a grant project. So anytime that you spent grant money on something, it should go there. One additional thing I just thought of, if any of you are on Fiber Connect and you get E-rate discounts, don't include them because you never get the money. The discounts are just applied to you, so they don't go in the annual report at all because there's never money in your budget. But okay, so that is the end of expenditures. Any other questions about expenditures? All right, we're going to hop ahead to holdings. So holdings are basically everything that's in your collection, more or less. And it should be, ideally, this number is from the end of your fiscal year, but in some cases, so if your ILS can kind of go back in time to tell you what you had, ideally you would say, oh, we reported the calendar year, so how much stuff did we have December 31st, 2019? But some ILSs are worse about that. So give whatever the best, and this is almost everything, give the best number you can come up with if you have confidence in it. So if you're like, oh, I'm doing the report, I should have gotten this number 3 months ago, but I didn't. I only have this number from today. That's fine. That's the number you have. Give it to us. It's fine. Don't stress about it. So yeah, okay, holdings. So holdings are how much is in your collection. Ideally, not including things that are discarded or lost or what have you, if you can break those out. We just want to know things that are in your collection, but give us the best number you have. Okay, so print materials. This is going to be the case for this whole section. It's going to ask for you to break it into adult and children, if you can. And then if you can't, just put a total in. Jill, I'm going to come back to you in 1 second. Thank you. So you want to break it into adult and children if you can. And if you can't, you just want a total number. Young adult, if you have a young adult section, that's sort of dependent. The way it's structured, IMLS considers adult as 14 plus for this. So there is probably more overlap in YA on adult than children. So in theory, it's probably better to put it under adult, but whatever you do is what you do. So I'm not going to lose sleep over where the YA numbers end up. Again, my guidance is to put them under adult unless you have a reason that you think that's not right. But in some cases, it might be hard to pull that number apart. So in each case, you want to do your adult number, children number, and if you can't break those out, or one of them is an I don't know or something like that, you put a total. If you don't know, if for whatever reason you don't have a good number for what's in your collection, then you want to put in a -1. If you're not automated and you don't really know what's in your collection, if you're in the middle of an inventory and you think that there's like 30,000 things that aren't really there, whatever it is, if you don't know, put a -1. If you have none of something, put a 0. Okay, so just to jump back, Jill asked, isn't that true of any of us that get E-rate funding? Yes, I'm sorry, Jill, that is, I wasn't broad enough. So the E-rate funding typically shouldn't appear on the annual report at all because you're typically getting discounts and the money is never in your hands. If you're doing one of the other options where the discounts aren't applied but you get the money sent to you, that might appear as a in the annual report, but I think in general, E-rate should not be appearing on the annual report. Okay, holdings. So we did print materials. Boom. Next one, ebooks. This one can be a little bit challenging because it's basically figuring out what's in your collection. Most libraries are part of a consortium. So you want to figure out what the consortium has available. And so I will do my best to get numbers, sort of standard numbers for RB Digital and GMLC's Overdrive. However, that will not include if you have Overdrive Advantage or if you purchased your own items, I won't have access to that number. So I'm going to make the standard number available, and you can start from there. But if you're able to go in, log into your account for Overdrive or ask me about RB Digital, I can give you an exact number of how many things are in the collection. Okay, there are these numbers, there's these check marks. Did you participate in Listen Up Vermont, in RB Digital, or if you did something else? This is just so I know what your numbers should be. Like if you say, yeah, I did Listen Up Vermont, and your total number of downloadable ebooks available is 5, then there's probably an error. So that's the only reason to ask that. Next, video items. These are traditional video items: DVDs, Blu-rays, VHS tapes, video playaways, video discs, I don't know, so that sort of thing. It's just how many you have, how many are adult, children, or if you don't have it broken into that, just do it by total. Boom. Last on this page is downloadable or streaming video items. This one is weird and is almost always 0 for everyone. It's a question that I think IMLS added and then discovered that it was not being used that way. This is, in holdings, I will say you should not, oh, I should have said this earlier. Items, let me rephrase. Things like Canopy or Hoopla, where you pay every time an item is used by your patron, you should not include those, for the most part, under holdings. Because, like for example, Hoopla, you have access to 200,000 items, but your patrons, every time they pick one, you get charged $2 or what have you. Including that 200,000 in your collections is confusing. It doesn't make sense. You don't really have access to those 200,000. You just have access to them if you pay for them. So Hoopla items and Canopy items shouldn't end up in here. There's one little exception. So that's why this one is confusing. It's basically video items that are available that you have paid for in something like Overdrive or something like that. But for the most part, nobody uses a service with that model, so it's almost always 0. That's a long way of saying probably it's 0 here. Okay, I'm going to hop through holdings because they're all very similar. And then we'll ask holdings questions right at the end. Audio items. These are both music and audiobooks. So any kind of either. CDs, records, audiobooks on CD, audiobooks on tape, if you still have them, MP3 discs, playaways, anything like that, those all go under audio. We don't care what of the 2 models they are, if it's music or audiobooks. So they all go there. Downloadable audio items. This, again, is probably coming through Overdrive or RB Digital. There are a few libraries who have their own independent non-consortial thing, but mostly it's through that. I'm going to provide the standard number for GMLC and the standard number for RB Digital, but if you have purchased items specifically for your patrons, you're going to either need to look that up yourself if you're on Overdrive, or you can ask me to find it in RB Digital. Okay, so that's it for normal items, I guess, sort of. Next, print serial subscriptions. Do you still have print serial subscriptions? If so, how many of them are adult? How many of them are children? And then, or a total. And this includes magazines or newspapers. Anything that you were getting, you were subscribed to, you were getting regularly, that you were offering to your patrons. Not things you're not offering your patrons. So if you get library journal, that shouldn't be included here. Anything else that is sort of internal use, if you don't make it available to patrons, it doesn't count. Okay. Well, last but not least, is databases. Oops, sorry, I'm jumping around. So there's a bunch of databases that we make available, that every library has available through the department. We count up that number because it includes everything in Vermont Online Library. It ends up at 51. It's all of Vermont Online Library, Learning Express, and Universal Class. So we have that number already. You don't need to count any of those. You only need to count if you're offering something else. And this is the one place that Hoopla and Canopy count. They count as 1, so not huge. But if you offer things like Ancestry or Mango or Consumer Reports or Novelist or anything else that is you're paying for a product that your patrons get to access from home, it's a database. So put it under your number. But if it's coming through us, or if it's in something like Overdrive, don't count that. Okay, so that's the end of holdings. Any questions on holdings? Okay, I'm going to jump to services. Services is kind of the most confusing. I mean, I guess you can make a case that the monetary ones are the most confusing, but it has the widest range of questions in it. It's basically everything that's kind of services got shoved into services. So we'll jump right in. Number one, number of registered borrowers. Ideally, they want it broken down into adults and children. But if you can't break that number down, you put in a total. If, for example, you give out family accounts and that's all you're doing, you probably want to say that you don't know, because you're going to want to say, would be a -1, because if you didn't have family accounts, you would have 2 to 3 times as many. So your number is kind of is not an apples to oranges. But in any case, you want the best number you have for adults and children, if available, of registered borrowers. IMLS suggests that you have done a read of expired patrons within the last 3 years. At this point, we are not holding people to that, but I think that is generally a good, it's definitely a best practice to not have patrons who expired certainly more than 3 years ago. And you could be significantly narrower than that. I know that patron numbers, registered borrower numbers, it can be a point of contention. So I'm not, but again, IMLS asks if you did it within the last 3 years, but we're not going to hold you to it. At some point, when standards are resolved, then we might put more pressure on that. But for now, it's whatever borrower number you have. Next, annual visits. How many people have visited the library for any reason? This means IMLS has clarified. I was more general with this question in previous years. IMLS has clarified that this means physically entering the building while you're open. This does not mean curbside people signing for curbside. This is not people going into your vestibule, picking up an item, and leaving. It does mean people coming for programs. It does mean anybody coming through your doors for any reason, theory while you're open. But I think whatever you have. So particularly if you have a door counter, it is whatever your door count is. You don't need to stress about it. It's just that. It does not include people. It doesn't get included for off-site programming. If you're doing off-site programming or programming on your lawn or what have you, that is not included. In previous years, I may have given different indications, but IMLS narrowed the scope of this question. So it's only people who physically entered your front doors. New this year, it is going to ask whether that is an actual count or an estimate. So just say which it is. If you came up with, this is a few weeks and then we multiply it to come up with a number for a year, that's an estimate. But if it's an actual door count you're making every day, or you have a door counter and you're adding that up, then it's not an estimate. Next question. How many reference questions were answered by library staff this year? This is one that a lot of people don't track as well as we would like. Because it's hard. I totally recognize it's hard. I've been frontline staff, and I've definitely had days where I would get to the end of it and be like, wow, I was so busy. And I'd look and I'd be like, I wrote down 2 reference questions. I had 48 reference questions. So I know that it happens. But I think it's an important service that libraries do that nobody else does, and that we frequently don't capture very well. But it's a work in progress. What is a reference question? Okay, so this is something that we have described a little bit better on our website. So I'm just going to go to it was right now the best. My favorite definition we have right now is under the COVID stats page. But let's see. Nope, I went to the wrong place. I'm sorry. Library stats during COVID. Okay, what is a reference question? A reference question is a reference question no matter how you get it. If you get it by email or phone or shouted through a window, it's still a reference question. So the question is whether or not something is a reference question is, did it require thought, research, or work reader's advisory? Did it involve searching for information on external sites or about external organizations? Then that's a yes. It is definitely reference. Not reference, was it solely directional? How do I get to your website? Where is the bathroom? Was it solely procedural? How does your drop-off work? Or does it require only a cursory check? You need to look in your ILS and see if a book is in. There's no other questions. You don't need to think. It's really, to some degree, did it require thought? Is to some degree where you break whether something is a reference question or not a reference question. It ends up being very broad. So most of the time someone asks you something, you need to do a little bit of work. And at the moment you've done a little bit of work, it's probably a reference question. So when in doubt, I think it's probably reference, unless somebody is asking you something very straightforward that you don't have to think. You can just read it verbatim from your policy or read it verbatim from the website. If you had to do any research, you need to figure out where something is, you need to figure out how to do a thing, it's reference. So sorry, I went on about that a little bit, but so that's what we want. We want your reference transaction question. Okay, next one. Online circulation usage. This is ebooks and audiobooks. Again, they probably went through, you're probably part of a consortia in many cases, so it went through that. So the trick is, if it's RB Digital, I have access to those numbers. I mail them out, but I can help you find your numbers for RB Digital. If it's GMLC's Overdrive, I do not have access to those numbers. So you need to get into your account and find them there. And if you are unsure how to do that, you're going to want to get in touch with, and I can point you in the right direction, but get in touch with folks at GMLC and they can remind you how to log into your account. But that's basically how many times does this stuff go out to your patrons. And that's that. So next. Okay, use of online databases. So this is, again, all the databases that I talked about earlier, including things like Hoopla, Canopy, etc., or Ancestry, or Mango, or Vermont Online Library, or Learning Express. This is, we want to know how many times were they used. I can help with the ones that we provide. So if you need help with them, let me know, and I will give you those numbers and tell you how to get them yourself as well. But the other ones I don't have access to. So I can kind of give you pointers, but you'll need to track those down on your own. But if you have questions, don't hesitate. Okay, that was use of online databases. Next, physical circulation. This covers all physical items. All physical items. Boom. I'm not going to explain it. All physical items. So it's which includes library of things. So those go under physical items. Okay. First, if you can break them into adult and children, great. If you can't, put them in a total. Same as the previous things we talked about. And so now we've gotten a whole collection use number, which is how many, both the electronic and the non-electronic physical items. Okay, next, total interlibrary loans. First number is how many libraries you sent. Second number is how many you received. That's it. If you're having trouble getting that, it's available should be available in Clover. You might have your own method that you keep track of it, but whatever it is, just pop that in there and you're set. Okay, next, programming. Okay, so this one is going to be getting a little more complicated in COVID. So I'm going to talk about the setup for programming, and then we'll talk about the COVID changes. So programming has two sections. This is going to be what's called in-person programming as of this year. How many programs did you make for adults, for children, and for young adults? So this is, who did it target? Who was it aimed at the most? And if it's a all ages show, who do you think it was the most targeted at? Is it a kids show to which adults are welcome? Is it an adult show to which kids are welcome? You have to pick one. If you can't break these down into the different chunks, or you don't have a total, or you don't have subsets, put it in a total. Totally fine. But this should count every program you do that the library does, library-sponsored programs. So whether they're on library property or elsewhere, physical programs, they're all going to go here. let's see, there's a question about how many of them were collaborations with other agencies in your community. So that should just be a number. Next is in-person programming attendance. So again, it is so this is attendance at adult programs, children's programs, young adult programs. So it matters what kind of program it is, how old the person is. If it's a grown-up going to a kids program, they go under kids program attendance. That's not always super intuitive, but that is the way it works. So that's how it goes. Okay, again, so total attendance broken down, or if you can't break it down, you do a total. Okay, so the things that are changing this year, so that's in-person programming. Next, we are adding virtual programming. Virtual programming is anything that is online and live and interactive. So people, you are presenting it while you are doing it. It is not pre-recorded. People can comment or talk or something. There is a back and forth in some fashion. Even if it's just comments like on Facebook or YouTube, that is interactive, live interaction. They can say something, you can react to it. That is a virtual program. So for virtual programs, we're going to say total number of programs, and they're again broken down by adult, children, or young adult. And then attendance, live attendance, people who were there while you were doing it. And that's broken down again by program type. So this is the new one. This is a little challenging. If your reporting period doesn't include COVID, and you happen to have these numbers, you can use them, but you don't. It's less vital, obviously, if you're not reporting the COVID period. Okay, so there's in-person programming, virtual programming, which we just talked about, and then there is recorded programming. Recorded programming is, I'm going to jump ahead to my report so I describe it right. Recorded programming is anything that is online and not live, basically. So it means one of two things, either things that were pre-recorded, either you pre-recorded them and then put them online and said, at 8 o'clock, we're going to put on our story time, but I already recorded it. Here it is. Or you got it from someone else. Oh, there's this BAT program. It's just a video. We're putting it on. Shoom. It's not live. There's no interaction. That's pre-recorded. Or the second and more likely category, well, not that those are unlikely, but is if you made a live virtual event and then you leave it up, people can look at it after it's live, but you're not there anymore. Those count as recorded programming. So if you have an event that was live and then you leave up indefinitely, you will have it under virtual program and under recorded program. And the virtual program will catch all the people who saw it live, and the recorded program will catch all the people who saw it recorded afterwards, non-live. So recorded programming is a little bit narrower. We're not asking you to break it down by age category. We just want to know number of recorded programs, or pre-recorded, or yes, recorded programs, and then number of views. For Facebook, we're looking for 1-minute views, which means they actually really watched it. And then for everything else, it is live views. Karen asked a question, kind of hard to know when the stats come in for YouTube programs. My impression was, and I have to recheck, was that YouTube has a spot where that breaks out live views from non-live views, but it's possible that I'm wrong. Let me make sure that there's a way to get to that. In any case, do your best. That covers every stat in here. But yeah, these are hard and these are new, the virtual and recorded programmings. So we're all just going to do our best with these stats. And like I said, I'll explore and see. I think that there's supposed to be ways to differentiate live from non-live, but I'm not 1,000% sure. But thank you for mentioning that. And I know it's going to be a little bit difficult. Okay, so that was programming. The three kinds of programming are in-person, virtual, recorded. Then there is one other one, which is currently called passive activities, but we're actually going to rename, if I can, self-directed activities. So this is sort of what you would call passive programming, things that you have done for people that they do on their own. It can be worksheets, it can be coloring sheets, it can be little craft packages that you send out, but it can also be a story walk or a trivia walk or anything where people are taking stuff or going and looking at something outside or what have you, where there's not a staff interacting. This is not online. These are in-person activities in some fashion, or there's a physical item. So for this one, we are asking how many passive activities did you offer? And a passive activity, a new one, if you change, like, oh, we did a craft, we put out a little craft bag, and then the next week we did a different one with different stuff, that's a new activity. But if you keep doing the one with the same stuff, it's not a different activity. So if you do, oh, we did one story walk all summer, one activity. We did a story walk and changed it out every month, that's 3 or 4 activities. So it's how many activities did you do? There's a narrative question, which is describe your activities. So it's just put in what you did. And then roughly how many people do you think took part? I know that's going to be a super rough number. So for stuff where people picked it up, you might have a handle on how much of it went out and use that number. But for things like story walks, you're probably going to have to speculate pretty hard. So just based on what visible usage, what do you think it probably was? What would, if your board said, can you ballpark usage on this activity, what number would you give them? That's the number we're looking for. We know it's going to be a very broad estimate. Don't stress about it. I don't want you out there like check. Don't do that. It's just an estimate. We're just going to try to ballpark it. So, okay. So that is that was the end of programming. Well, okay. There's one more. Last programming question is non-library sponsored programs. We added this last year. This is programs that happen in your library that you provide space, but don't really do anything else. And it's just a number. We don't need to know how many people were there. We don't need to know what kind of program it was. If the Boy Scouts come weekly, then and they do it all year, that's 52 programs. So every time they come to your building and do it. What's the difference between a library sponsored program and a non-library sponsored program? We have some involvement. So my sense is, did you do work beyond setting up and taking down and providing a key? If you did, if you're advertising it, if it's listed on your calendar, if you're marketing it to people, then it's probably your program, or at least it's enough your program that you could describe it. But if you have very little involvement with it, except letting people use your building, that's what we're really trying to capture here. All those programs where people don't have anything to you, don't interact, you don't have to do any work, but you provide the space, and it's crucial. It's a crucial service. Again, these are probably going to drop like crazily during COVID, but that's how it goes. So number year long. Does letting them use our Zoom account for a meeting apply? No. That's interesting. And I would, yeah, I don't. Oh, you know what? I think that's a yes. I would put that under a virtual program. I think at the point where you're offering your Zoom program to somebody, your Zoom account to somebody, you are significantly supporting their virtual programming. So I would include that under a virtual program. Yeah, I think that would be my take. That's involved enough that it would go there. I would not put it under here because this is really a physical question. But if you felt like you had enough involvement that it goes under virtual, I would just put it under a virtual program. And if that doesn't answer your question sufficiently, email me and we can hash that out. Okay, we're in the home stretch. Annual outreach services. This is basically deliveries. I don't know why we call it outreach. I mean, it is kind of outreach, but these are deliveries to homes. So these could expand dramatically during COVID. I just remembered I forgot one of another COVID question, but we'll get back to that. Oh, no, you know what? I'll say it right now. There is going to be an additional COVID question, which is curbside circulation. So your overall circulation number should include everything, including curbside, everything your ILS says that went out. But if you happen to have curbside circulation separate, we'd like that number just because we want to show what people are accomplishing during curbside. If you don't stress, but that's going to be another question that's going to be in there. Okay, sorry. These are deliveries. These are deliveries to individuals' homes, deliveries to childcare providers and centers, deliveries to anybody else. These typically I think of as either homebound visits or visits to like daycare, where you bring them a whole bunch of books, and then they come back eventually, or they don't come back. It's deliveries either way, whether they're books that are coming back or not. So that's outreach. Okay, now we're getting into computer questions. Okay, first question. How many computer workstations are available for public access? This is just for the public. If you have one that is public and staff, that counts. We don't want OPACs here. Oh, hold on. I believe that's the case. I might have to verify that, but I believe we're just looking for public computers, the computers that the public can normally use to do internet stuff or whatever, to do whatever they need to. And it's just a number. So it shouldn't be OPACs. It's general use public computers. All right, next. How many people were, including library staff and the general public, were trained formally and informally in the year to use your library's questions? This is a question. This is a really vague question, so I apologize. We've been trying to kind of restructure it, but it's hard to get at what we're looking for. So basically, this means, anytime that you trained anybody formally or informally to do something on a computer, including staff, put it here. Let's see, Karen, are you talking about this question, the how many people? Or the the public computers. For the public computers, I want the normal. I want the normal answer. Don't ignore COVID, because we already know elsewhere that it's not. Yeah. No, I don't. I think you should just use the normal question there, even though you make a good point. You might be open but not have any computers. I don't want it to move around. It's just going to. We think of that as a static question, and I think that it will be addressed elsewhere. So. But yeah, okay. So this is how many people were trained formally and informally to use computers. I wouldn't stress too much about that question because it's really general. And again, we want to evolve it or change it or something. But at this point, anytime that you did any interaction where you helped somebody, you could construe that as counting, as well as more formal training. So do your best, but don't stress about that one. Next. How many times were the library's computers used by patrons during the year? And this number, obviously, Karen, will be I think is a better indicator. So if your number drops precipitously, we know that probably you weren't offering it or people weren't coming in. So this is every time somebody uses your computer, a member of the public uses the computer during the year. And it's however you track it. If you have like a sign-in sheet, you count up the number, you just tally mark, or if you don't, or maybe you have an online, or not an online, but there's a software that does it. You track that, you have a real number, or maybe you are making an estimate. You said, oh, we did it for 2 weeks. This is how many people we had. We multiply it. So you do your best. Next, okay, so we were dropping out asking about whether people have wireless because almost everybody does. But then, how many wireless sessions were counted in the year, or did people have in the year? This one's hard. We know. In some cases, it's easy. It's easy to find this number in your in your router software, how your wireless is set up. But in many cases, particularly if you're using a home router, it can be a lot harder. So you do your best. Some people give us whatever number you have, and if you don't have a number that you feel any confidence about, put in a -1. And this is a thing that we hope to get better numbers at some point. But again, that was maybe a thing we were going to work at this year, but then COVID happened and that sort of trumped it. So do your best, give us your best number, the number you're confident in, however you got it. And if you feel like you just have no confidence in any number, put in a -1, totally fine. Next, we took out a couple of these, how do you get your internet question, because we wanted to filtering, things like that. Do you have an ILS? Okay, last question is, how many How many people visit your website? Again, this is, depending on your website software, this might be real easy or maybe very challenging. We're looking for a visit or a session if you have access to it. If you don't have access to that, just put -1. Don't try to estimate, because you won't be able to come up with anything that's ballparky, because you have no real feedback. So if you can get it from your website, if you're not sure, get in touch with me. But again, this is another one like wireless. This is the thing we were going to maybe work on, but then a whole bunch of other stuff happened, so we didn't. So it's just your best. We get your best, and that's totally fine. Okay, so that is the end of services. Like I said, services covers a lot of ground and a bunch of different categories. Do people have questions about the services section? Okay, so I am going to, let's see, I'm going to see what I was going to say next. Sorry. Okay, I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint, I think. No, we'll do it in here. Okay, so when you think you're done, there are a few more last steps. First off, everybody, there's a question: what successes have you had this year, and what's new at your library? You can go on as much as you want. There's some great information in here that people put in. It does get publicized. It's not just for us. It will go out in the world. So don't put anything you don't want to go out in the world. But it's basically, what are you proud of, and what did you deal with? And again, I understand that sometimes you're like, oh my God, I just finished the report, and the last thing you want to do is write a whole narrative. But we appreciate whatever you can give. You fill that out, put the date. Last part, the librarian, which should be the director and the chairperson of the Board of Trustees, says, yes, we agree with everything here, puts in a date, certifies it. And then, so there's actually one, you probably don't want to do this until you're really, really done, but it doesn't matter. You can do this part and then see if you're really, really done. To tell if you're really, really done, you're going to click up here on Show Status. And you can do this at any point. What it will do is it shows you three things. It shows you edit checks, which I'll talk about in a second. Unanswered questions, which is every question that the system thinks is required that you did not put in an answer. In many cases, what it means is you need to put in a 0 or an NA. But in some cases, it means you just didn't fill it out and you need to get to it. So it will not let you advance until you have filled out all your unanswered questions. If you get stuck on this, email me and I will see what's wrong. And in many cases, it's just it needs a 0 somewhere that doesn't have a 0. Flag questions. You can, here I'll show you. If you have a question that you're not sure about, you can flag it. Boom. That's for you. It's not for us. It is a way to tell you that you want to go back to something. So you can come here and it'll show you anything that's flagged. But okay, suppose you got all your unanswered questions. You're like, okay, those are all dealt with. Now edit checks. So edit checks are whenever the system thinks that the answer that you gave doesn't really make sense or doesn't match up with what you did last year. So it's not brilliant. Sometimes it will ask you questions about things you're like, of course, that's obvious. But basically, it's like if a number changes dramatically from year to year, or if you were doing something in one part, but then, like if you have programming but 0 attendance, or if you you offer online books but you have no circulation, it will ask you to justify it. Basically, it just wants you to write in a little note. Over here, it will tell you what kind of note. It's usually a federal note. There are a few state notes. And you just go in here, you say, why is something wrong? Let's see. Because we didn't do programming this year. And then you fill in all of the edit checks, and you get to the bottom of the page, and you click Save. And then, as long as you've put some comment in them, they should go away. all an edit check wants is, there's the other possibility is that the number is wrong. So you might want to look at it and just make sure it makes sense. But in general, all it wants is an explanation, and then you are done. So once you're ready to go, you've gotten all the edit checks, unanswered questions. 5 questions actually don't matter because they're really for you. You click submit, and it will come to this page, and it will tell you that you've done or not done all 3 of those things. Oh, it doesn't want, okay, it wants you to turn off all your flags. So I guess you actually have to do that before the end. So it'll tell you to do this. It'll hit click submit. You'll click submit. Bam, you are submitted. That is the end of the survey. So now I'm going to hop out and go back to the PowerPoint. We are in the home stretch. Thank you for being willing to go through all of that. Okay, let's see. It doesn't find it. Of course it doesn't find it. Come on. Sorry, Teams is just being unhelpful at the moment. So let me get back to where I need to be. Okay, if not, then I'm just gonna. All right, it just doesn't want to see PowerPoint anymore, which is fine. So I will just walk you through it. Okay, so we're in the home stretch. Let's see, what else is important? Oh, okay, I'll just tell you briefly what happens. So you submit by the period. If I have any questions, I'll come back to you, but otherwise, that's great. Everybody submits. I get all of the data from all the libraries stuck together, and then I submit it to IMLS. However, there's usually a bunch of tiny errors, and they're not really errors. It's just like the system wants a -1 and there's a 0, or it wants an NA when there's a -1. So I just finesse the data like that, and finesse makes it sound like I'm really changing things, but I'm not. I'm just making it. And so I do that, and eventually IMLS takes it, and we're done. Huzzah. Let's see. Oh, okay. So we talked about browsers. We talked about browser buttons. But another thing that you should avoid doing is don't have more than one person or even tab logged into the site at once. So that means if there's more than one of you working on it, do it one at a time. But also, if you're working on it and I go in to check, and so I don't do this without asking, it's easy to overwrite a page. Like if you have a page open and you're writing it, and then I have a page open at the same time, so don't have 2 people in at the same time. Again, we talked about browser buttons. You shouldn't use the back and forth browser buttons. And we talked about browsers. Chrome is best. Firefox is probably okay, but Chrome is better. Microsoft Edge, I would avoid. Yes, so we talked about COVID changes. Let's see. I'm just trying to see if I missed anything under the COVID ones. I think we are programming was the big one. Passive programming. Oh, okay, right at the end, I didn't show you these because they're not on there yet. IMLS has added 13 yes, no, not applicable questions about the pandemic. So things that you library might have done or not done. For example, let's see. Did the library staff provide services to the public during any portion of the period when the building was physically closed? Did the library add or increase access to electronic collections due to COVID? During the pandemic, did the library allow users to register for a library card online or by phone? So they're just yes, no. They're just, did you do them at all during the reporting period? But those are the IMLS specific questions. And that's it. That's the survey. To reiterate, if you have any questions at any point, you should get in touch with me. Don't ever hesitate to do that. I'm always happy to discuss. And it's please don't. I always feel terrible when somebody says, "Oh, I've been struggling with this for like 4 days," and I kind of don't struggle with it for 4 days. Get in touch with me just like immediately. You're not taking up my time. You're not anything. You're just that's what I'm here for, and I want to make you do a ton of work. I mean, you do a ton of work all the time, but you do a ton of work around the report, and so I want to make it as easy as possible. So just get in touch if something is giving you trouble. If something you're not sure what to do, you don't know what to do with the data, you don't have the right data, get in touch. So, okay, I talked for a while. Questions? Any remaining questions on the survey, the process, things that you aren't sure about? I will give you a chance to talk, and then I have a few more closing notes. But anything else? And again, you can feel free to mute yourselves or talk in the chat, whatever works best. So I will point out that this is going to be recorded, and we will have it up on the website fairly shortly. We also have a page on our website that is devoted to the annual report, and it's going to repeat everything. It's going to seem repetitive based on this, but if you ever need to double check, you can always go there and get some follow-up information. So on Wednesday, you have gotten all the information that I'm going to present on Wednesday. And Wednesday, I'm going to go do the same thing, but only focus on the COVID changes. So you don't need to do it. You probably don't want to do it. But yes, you probably don't want to do it. You should already know all that stuff at this point. So yes, thank you. Is the report, okay, 2 questions. Is the report accessible now? No, unfortunately it isn't. I can give you the questions, but the actual report isn't finalized yet. The vendor has it, but has to finish making it so it's available online. So, you can get the full list of questions on our page. Hold on, let me, let's just share that again. Now it sees it. Okay, so on our page, submitting the annual report for public libraries, if you scroll down near the bottom, the full list of questions for the survey are in a PDF, so you can see all of them. But again, you can't go in yet, unfortunately. You could grab that and start writing down answers on it if you want to make it easier when it gets to be time. And I'm hopeful that we'll open up on December 1. It is possible because every state library has the same 2 vendors for these things, and everybody's been adding all kinds of questions. So it's possible it will get pushed a little bit back, but that's my hope. Dina asks if the PowerPoint will be up on the website, and yes, we'll put the video and the PowerPoint up there. And the PowerPoint is more succinct than the video. So, and yeah, that is basically it. That's the annual report in an hour and 47 minutes. Any other last questions? Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. I know that this is a lot of time, and when there's a lot going on right now, so I really appreciate that you made time for this, and appreciate all that you do and all that you've been doing the last forever. But I also appreciate all the work you do on the report. But I want to make it as easy as possible. So definitely give a holler if I can help at any point, anytime.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good presentation.
Thanks a lot. All right. Everybody have a great day, and good luck with everything that's going on. Appreciate it. And everybody take care.
You too.
Thank you.